What's up? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Holly and this is my BookTube channel. As you might expect, we talk all things books and reading, and if you've been here for any amount of time, you know I'm usually drinking coffee. Today I'm drinking the Kicking Horse Ola blend. I believe it's their light roast blend. It's really good either way, so if you don't already have some coffee or tea or drink of your choice, go grab some, settle in, and let's jump into this video. I'm excited for today's video because I usually post videos Mondays and Thursdays. That's kind of the schedule I keep for myself. Well, this video is going to come out on Thursday, February 16th, which means the day after that will be February 17th, 2/17 or 2/17. Are any of my Stephen King fans picking up on that number? If you are, you'll probably know it is the hotel room number in The Shining. So I thought this will be a perfect day to do an entire video on Stephen King books. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the books that I have already read by Stephen King, the books that I own by Stephen King but haven't read, and then we're going to get into a little something I made to help me get through more Stephen King books. So to start off with the books that I've already read by Stephen King, I started reading Stephen King in high school, I believe, and so some of these, it's been a long time since I've read them, and my memory on them is not as sharp, but if I need to, we'll read the back of the book and give y'all an idea of what it's about. To start things off, we got to start with the first Stephen King book I ever read, The Shining, hence the t-shirt. It's my favorite, it's the one that's the most memorable for me, and it's probably one of his best works, arguably. The back says, the Overlook Hotel is more than just a home away from home for the Torrance family. For Jack, Wendy, and their young son Danny, it is a place where past horrors come to life, and where those gifted with The Shining do battle with the darkest evils. Stephen King's classic thriller is one of the most powerfully imagined novels of our time. I mean, if you've seen the movie or read the book, you pretty much know what this one's about. Essentially, Jack gets hired as, I believe, like the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel in Colorado. And essentially, to not spoil anything, stuff starts happening at this hotel. Eerie, haunting, creepy stuff. And I just remember being a teenager in my room freaking out. This book scared me. I was so afraid to go down the hallway at my parents' home because there's just this iconic hallway scene in the movie and in the book where there's just this really long hallway with creepy stuff happening. So there you have it. That is The Shining by Stephen King. The next book I have for you is one that I read quite a while ago as well, and that is The Green Mile. This one is amazing as well. This takes place in, I believe, the 1930s in a penitentiary or a prison, and I think it's like a maximum security prison because most of the book takes place in cell block E, where they keep the death row inmates. And there's a particular inmate who is kind of the center of the book. His name is John Coffey, and he is he's got some sort of disability where his mind doesn't work like everybody else's, and he's actually physically a giant man, and that is relevant to the book, but I won't say why because it kind of spoils it. And you essentially are following his story and what's happening in cell block E, and it's kind of from the point of one of the main guards, and there's another guard who's just a total butthead, to put it lightly, Percy. You'll learn to hate him if you haven't read it yet, and it's just incredible. And John Coffey, you find out, has these like crazy abilities, and he's been put in this prison because he's been accused of a really horrific crime, which I won't go into detail about because it's pretty graphic, but that's essentially what happens without spoilers. It's a great Stephen King novel. I loved it when I read it. The movie is fantastic. Check it out if you haven't. It's starring Tom Hanks and Michael Clark Duncan. So that is The Green Mile by Stephen King. Next up, I have Needful Things. This book came out the year I was born, 1991, so it's been out for quite some time, and it's quite a thick book to get through. It is hard to explain, so I'm going to do my best. The book describes it as, a wonderful new store has opened in the little town of Castle Rock, Maine. Whatever your heart's secret desire, sexual pleasure, wealth, power, or even more precious things, it's for sale. And even though every item has a nerve-shattering price, the owner is always ready to make a bargain. In this chilling novel by one of the most potent imaginations of our time, evil is on a shopping spree and out to scare you witless. Like I said, it's kind of a hard book to explain, but essentially this man comes to town and opens up this shop, and it has a variety of items, and basically, from what I remember, there are two methods of payment. One method obviously being money, and another method being you have to like do him a favor or something like that. It's been so long since I've read it, but I remember at first thinking, where's this book going? And then it just kept getting better and better, and it's really incredible and intricate and hard to describe in words, but if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, definitely pick it up. That is Needful Things by Stephen King. And just a little disclaimer, I'm giving very brief synopses of all of these books because there's a few to get through, and I don't want to sit here all day going into a total deep dive into all my thoughts on the book. That might be something to look into for future videos, but for now, I'm just giving you a brief overview of the ones that I have read so you kind of know what they're about, and then we can move on. Next up, we have another classic. We have It. Everyone's at least heard of It. Even if you've never seen the movie or read the book, you've seen images of the creepy clown and the red balloon and the storm drain. You've probably heard of it in some capacity. This one is another really thick book, and it's a lot to get through, but it's absolutely worth it. I remember loving this book. I remember being kind of confused at first because there's just a lot going on, but once you wrap your head around it, it's really brilliant. The book says, "Welcome to Derry, Maine. It's a small city, a place as hauntingly familiar as your own hometown. Only in Derry, the haunting is real. They were just kids when they first stumbled upon the horror. Now they are grown-up men and women who have gone out into the big world to gain success and happiness. But none of them can withstand the force that has drawn them back to Derry to face the nightmare without an end and the evil without a name." That part about the evil without a name, that's kind of why it's called It. It's this entity, this evil entity that has a variety of names, the most prominent of which is Pennywise the clown. He's the one everybody knows about, and he's the one that terrorized these kids back when they were younger, and that's the one that most people remember. And it's just all about them dealing with this evil entity when they were kids, and it's kind of a coming of age story. That's the way Stephen King has described it. The only, I guess, beef that I had with this book, and I'll try not to spoil it, but there's a scene towards the end that I remember reading and thinking, I did not just read what I thought I read. So I reread it. I absolutely read what I thought I read, and it's disturbing. And Stephen King has been questioned about it, and he didn't see anything wrong with it. So yeah, that's my only, like, cringe about this book. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going into detail on this channel, but it's weird, and I don't know that it was necessary in this book or ever. That's all I'll say about that. But yeah, there you have it. That is It by Stephen King. For this next book, I'm gonna make it quick because I've already talked about it in previous videos in somewhat depth, and that is Dreamcatcher by Stephen King. This is the one I've most recently read. This is the one I've talked about with the alien invasion and the guys that go up to Maine for a hunting trip when this invasion happens, and just all the absolute chaos that ensues after that. If you want a little bit better description, go check out some of my earlier videos, but there you have it. That is Dreamcatcher by Stephen King. And the final book that I've read by Stephen King is Salem's Lot. This one is pretty famous. This one is excellent. It is Stephen King's take on a vampire story. It is his vampire novel, and I loved it. This is one of my favorites. I thought it was so well done. You're basically following a writer who goes back to his hometown to try to get some inspiration and write his next book. And essentially he wants to write it about the Marsden house, where he had this traumatic experience as a kid, and it's still bothering him to this day. But someone has moved into the Marsden house. And as you can imagine, if it is a vampire novel, who do you think moved in? You'd be right. So it's all about the writer and the person living in the Marsden house and all of the really creepy, evil things that start happening, and people are dying in a really weird way, and people are being affected, and it's hard to get into without spoiling it, but just use your imagination. It's a vampire novel. There you have it. That is Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Next up, I have 4 books that I own by Stephen King, but I have not read yet. So I'll just run through these kind of briefly with you as well. First up is 11/22/63. This is actually my mom's copy. This is her book, and we swap books back and forth all the time, so I borrowed this from her for the sake of this video. She read it and absolutely loves it. She's kind of a history buff, and she loves all the JFK assassination stuff. So since that is kind of one of the central themes of this book, she read it and said it was excellent and told me I really need to get on it when it comes to reading this one. Essentially what I understand about it is that you're following this one individual who is able to go back in time, and he has an opportunity to stop the JFK assassination. That's really all I kind of know about it. I don't know a ton more, and I kind of want to go in blind so that it's not spoiled, but my mom said that it's kind of futuristic. There's a lot of time travel, but you also get a lot of atmospheric stuff from back in the day, obviously in the 60s and maybe even late 50s, where this man went back in time, and she said it was really enjoyable, really amazing. I've also heard other booktubers talk really highly about this, like Zach with Zach's Books. He's kind of a Stephen King aficionado. He said that this replaced The Shining as his #1 Stephen King book. My jaw dropped. I was like, what? A book that can replace The Shining? I don't know about that, but I trust Zach's opinion, so maybe he's right. I'll have to read it and see. It's quite a thick book. I think my mom bought this right when it came out years ago, so it's the hardback edition. It's heavy, so I need to put it down. But there you have it. That is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Next up, we have another one of Stephen King's most iconic novels, and that is Pet Sematary. I hope y'all can see it. It's kind of shiny, so I hope I'm holding it at an angle that's not blinding you, but it is Pet Sematary. The book describes it this way. Can Stephen King scare even himself? Has the author of Carrie, The Shining, Cujo, and Christine ever conceived a story so horrifying that he was, for a time, unwilling to finish writing it? Yes, this is it. Set in a small town in Maine to which a young doctor, Lewis Creed, and his family have moved from Chicago, Pet Sematary begins with a visit to the graveyard in the woods where generations of children have buried their beloved pets. But behind the Pet Sematary, there is another burial ground, one that lures people to it with seductive promises and ungodly temptations. That's a heck of a description, but you've got my attention. A book so terrifying that Stephen King even had trouble writing it? I'm in. I mean, of course, it's on my list. Gotta read it. That's Pet Sematary by Stephen King. The next book I own but haven't read is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. This was his most recent release. It came out just last year in 2022. So this one was a Christmas gift, and I'm so excited to get to it. The cover art alone just sucks you in. Look at that. So cool. Again, this is one I don't know a ton about, but I purposely go in blind to a lot of these books just so I can experience it firsthand for myself. But I believe you're following kind of obviously the characters you can see here on the cover. I think the boy's name is Charlie and the dog's name is Radar. And I've heard Radar is like a major character. Stephen King really does a job of fleshing out who Radar is and his role in the book, and I don't know a ton other than that, but I love dogs and I love Stephen King, so I'm excited to get to Fairy Tale by Stephen King. By the way, if y'all can hear my dogs like whining and scratching at the door, it's because they kept like getting the zoomies and running through here and threatening to knock this camera over. So I put them in their little doggy room that I have set up for them where they can go in and out and play outside and lay on their beds, you know. But they're still wanting to be in here with me. They don't want to be in their bougie little dog room. They want to be in here with me. So they're whining and scratching at the door. So if you hear that in the background, I apologize. My dogs are not being tortured. They're just whining. Anyway, the final book that I own by Stephen King but have not yet read is called Mr. Mercedes. I just picked this one up a few days ago when I was in Houston, Texas. They have a Barnes & Noble, which I don't have here in my town, so I picked this one up along with a bunch of other books that I'll be sharing in a future video. So stay tuned for that. The backstory to this one is that Stephen King is going to be releasing a book called Holly. My ears perked up. It's even spelled the same as my name, so of course I'm interested. But when I looked into it and started chatting with some people on Instagram about it, they said that if I tried to go and read Holly first, I'd be very confused because Holly is a character in the Bill Hodges trilogy, of which Mr. Mercedes is the first. So I was told your best bet is to go back and read the Mr. Mercedes trilogy first, and then a couple of others, and then try to read Holly. That's the best way to try to understand it. And Stephen King, his novels and his world is kind of set up that way where there's little series. They're not all tied together. Not every Stephen King book is tied together. Not exactly anyway, but there are little chunks of series in all the books that he's read. So this is one that I need to get to before I can even try to read the book Holly that's coming out, I want to say maybe this year. So that is Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. All right, and finally, the last thing I wanted to share with y'all is something I just recently made. This could be a really good idea or a really bad idea. I'm not sure which, but we're gonna find out. Can y'all hear all that barking? The dogs in this neighborhood are going nuts. I think there might be someone in the alleyway. Sometimes we have people walking down the alleyway or repairmen going down the alleyway. One night we had like, this is kind of, I don't know if y'all care about this, but since we're talking Stephen King and horror books, my husband and I were asleep. This was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and we hear our dogs going nuts in the backyard. So we get up to investigate, and my husband gets his flashlight, shines it in the backyard, and there's this hole in our fence where the dogs have kind of created a hole so they can peek through and see what's in the alley. And my husband shines the flashlight on it, and this hand comes through it. Oh my God, we freaked. My husband runs out there. We're in Texas, so he's definitely armed. Anyway, and he runs out there, opens the back gate, and is like, "What the hell are you doing?" And there's this like homeless man wandering around in the back and trying to pet our dogs. We had to call the cops because he refused to leave and he was terrorizing our dogs and the neighbors' dogs. So eventually the situation was diffused, but it was freaking scary to see a human hand come through your fence and try to grab your dog. like, no. So I had to get up just a second ago and make sure that that was not the same man that had come back and was driving my dogs crazy. But anyway, if you can hear the barking, that's what it is. There's probably a poor repairman back there that does not deserve all the racket. But anyway, where was I? Ah yes, the final piece of this video. I made something recently that could be a really good idea or a really bad idea. I'm not really sure which yet, but we're gonna try it out and see. I created this TBR jar. It is Stephen King specific. I have filled it with every book that Stephen King has ever written. It's a mixture of not only the books he wrote as Stephen King, but the books that he wrote under the pen name Richard Bachman, and even his short stories. My thought process with this jar is that each month, when I do my TBR for the month, I need to reach into this jar, pick a book out, and I have to read that one. I got this idea because I was looking at the Stephen King books that I have read, and it seemed a little pitiful. For someone like me who loves Stephen King, has a Stephen King t-shirt, I've read a pitifully small amount of his books. So I thought, you know what, Holly, you need to get on it. And maybe this would be a good way to do it. I had this jar kind of laying around. I think it was a vase at one point, but it kind of reminds me of the Pennywise red balloon. So I thought, perfect. That is gonna be the Stephen King TBR jar. Now, obviously, there are some caveats to this. If I pull out a book that is number 3 in one of his series, I'm not going to start there. I'll just go and read the first one in that series. So there's a little bit of leeway. And stupidly, I even included the books in here that I've already read, not thinking. So if I pull one of those out, I'll of course just pick another one. But I thought that would be kind of a fun way to challenge myself to dive more into the Stephen King world. I want to be able to converse with other booktubers who are Stephen King aficionados and really know what I'm talking about, because I'm always so impressed by the people that have read every single one of his books and can talk about them at length. There's so many booktubers that I enjoy watching that love Stephen King, and I don't think the Stephen King world will ever be out of date, because he's not just one of the best horror authors of all time. He's one of the best authors, period, of all time. He is incredibly brilliant. His writing is nearly unmatched. I mean, he's just one of those authors that is worth your time, worth your energy, and it may take a lifetime for me to get through every book he's ever written, especially since he still keeps writing them, but I'm gonna try. And it's in a cool red jar that looks like the Pennywise balloon. So that's my plan. I'm sticking to it. That about wraps up my Stephen King video for the day. Like I said, for y'all, when you see this, it should be 2/17 tomorrow. So I'm channeling all the Stephen King vibes in this video, and we will see the Stephen King TBR jar in my future TBR videos, and I'll be picking a book at random in those, which will kind of spice them up and make it a little more fun. Let me know which Stephen King books you've read and which one is next on your list. And let me know if you think I should start with any book in particular or just kind of go for it with my TBR jar. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and until then, I will see y'all in my next video. Bye, y'all.